The warnings had been there for days. Intercepts, satellite passes, sudden movements inside Bandar Abbas. But no one expected Iran to make its move this openly. At 4:12 local time, the radar picture aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford changed in a way that forced every operator inside Combat Information Center to lean forward. 5 surface contacts, tight formation, high speed. They weren't fishing boats. They weren't patrol craft. They were warships, and they were moving to block the carrier's path. The Ford Carrier Strike Group had been operating in international waters, conducting what Washington described as routine freedom of navigation operations. Tehran saw it differently. Intelligence chatter suggested senior commanders inside the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy believed the presence of America's most advanced nuclear-powered carrier so close to Iranian shores was a direct challenge. But this wasn't the usual harassment. The 5 Iranian vessels emerging from the haze were positioned deliberately, forming a wide arc nearly 28 nautical miles ahead of the Ford's projected course. It was a maritime barricade, a statement. Leading the formation was a destroyer believed to be the Sahand, flanked by 2 frigates and 2 missile corvettes. Their radar emissions were low, controlled. Their speed was not. Inside the Ford, Captain Daniel Reeves didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "General quarters, all hands, man your battle stations." Across 4.5 acres of warship steel, nearly 5,000 sailors moved with rehearsed precision. The Ford wasn't just another aircraft carrier. It was the newest symbol of American sea power: electromagnetic catapults, advanced radar arrays, and a strike wing capable of reshaping the battlefield in minutes. But none of that mattered if a miscalculation spiraled out of control. The escort screen tightened immediately. The guided missile cruiser, USS Normandy, shifted slightly starboard. 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers expanded their defensive geometry, Aegis combat systems switching to full active tracking mode. Above deck, flight crews sprinted. Within 3 minutes of the alarm, the first 4 FA-18E Super Hornets were being brought to life. Engines whining, wings unfolding, weapons checks rapid and clinical. Below deck, radar operators tracked the Iranian vessels spreading wider, each one adjusting course to force the Ford into a narrowing corridor. This was not random maneuvering. It was area denial. The first radio transmission from the Iranian destroyer came at 4:19. "You are approaching restricted waters. Alter course immediately." The coordinates transmitted placed the Ford well outside Iran's territorial limits. Captain Reeves ordered a calm reply. "We are operating in accordance with international law. We will maintain present course." Silence followed. Then something changed. At 4:24, the Iranian lead destroyer increased speed sharply. Simultaneously, fire control radar spikes appeared on American threat receivers. Inside CIC, the warning tone was unmistakable. They were being painted. Locking fire control radar onto a warship isn't diplomacy. It's preparation. "Multiple targeting signatures confirmed," a tactical officer announced. On the Ford's bridge, Reeves made a single decision. Launch the air wing. The electromagnetic catapult hurled the first Super Hornet into the dark sky. Within 90 seconds, 3 more followed. Behind them, 2 EA-18G Growlers roared off the deck, their electronic warfare pods primed. The Iranian formation didn't break. Instead, one of the frigates veered slightly outward, opening space. The corvettes accelerated ahead, reducing the distance to under 20 nautical miles. They were closing the box. At 4:29, the first missile launch plume was detected. Not from the destroyer, from one of the smaller corvettes. 2 anti-ship cruise missiles burst from angled launchers, dropping to wave-top altitude within seconds. The Persian Gulf night lit briefly with flame. The missiles skimmed low, barely 15 meters above the surface, tracking toward the carrier group. In that instant, the engagement shifted from standoff to combat. The USS Normandy's SPY radar locked the incoming threats 1.8 seconds after launch. The Aegis system didn't hesitate. Intercept solutions were calculated faster than any human could process. Vertical launch cells opened. 2 evolved Sea Sparrow missiles erupted skyward. The timeline compressed. 45 seconds from launch to impact. The first interceptor met the incoming missile head-on, detonating it in a brilliant flash 10 miles out. Shrapnel rained into the sea. The second Iranian missile attempted a minor terminal maneuver. It didn't matter. The second ESSM destroyed it at 8 miles. 90 seconds. 2 intercepts. 0 damage. But the meaning was unmistakable. Iran had fired first. The rules of engagement were now clear. Air Wing, you are cleared hot. Above, the Super Hornets rolled into attack vectors. The Growlers began flooding the spectrum with high-powered jamming, blinding Iranian radar screens. And what happened next would unfold in less than 5 minutes, faster than Tehran could react, and far more decisively than anyone aboard those 5 warships expected. The sky above the Gulf was no longer dark. Electronic warfare painted it invisible. As the EA-18G Growlers pushed forward, their jamming pods unleashed controlled chaos across Iranian radar bands. Fire control systems aboard the lead destroyer flickered. Targeting data dissolved into noise. Communication circuits filled with static bursts. The 5-ship formation that had looked coordinated just minutes earlier began to fracture. Above them, the first Super Hornet flight split into 2 attack elements. Viper 1, targeting lead destroyer. Viper 2, take the outer frigate. No shouting, no panic, just calm voices over encrypted channels. The pilots descended to medium altitude, locking their sensors onto the largest radar return, the Iranian destroyer at the center of the formation. Infrared and radar overlays confirmed its profile. Its deck-mounted launchers were still hot from the earlier missile firing. This wasn't a warning shot scenario anymore. 2 AGM-84 Harpoon missiles detached from the wings of the lead Hornet. A second later, 2 more followed from its wingman. 4 missiles ignited in staggered sequence, turbojets roaring as they leveled out just above the waterline. Simultaneously, the second American pair targeted the nearest frigate. 2 harpoons launched from opposite headings, approaching from separate vectors to split defensive fire. Down below, Iranian crews scrambled. Their radar screens were degraded, partially blinded by Growler interference. Optical tracking systems attempted to compensate, but the sea surface clutter and jamming distortion made precise targeting difficult. Point defense guns began firing prematurely, sprays of tracer rounds stitching the dark sky without a lock. The first harpoon reached the destroyer in just over 2 minutes. Impact. The missile struck just aft of the bridge, penetrating deep before detonating. The blast ruptured the superstructure, sending debris outward in a violent burst of flame and smoke. The second harpoon arrived seconds later, striking amidships near the main radar mast. The explosion tore through internal compartments, shredding cables and severing power lines. The destroyer's lights flickered, then went dark. But the third missile sealed its fate. Approaching from the starboard side, it punched below the waterline. The warhead detonated inside engineering spaces. Within moments, seawater rushed through ruptured bulkheads. The vessel began to list. Onboard damage control teams attempted to respond, but fire and flooding spread faster than containment could be established. Above, the American pilots did not circle to admire the result. They moved to the next target. The outer frigate tried to turn away, attempting to flee east toward Iranian coastal defenses. It didn't make it far. One harpoon struck near the forward missile magazine. The explosion triggered a secondary detonation that lifted the bow violently. Shock waves rippled across the hull. The second missile impacted seconds later near the aft propulsion section. The combined blasts cracked the vessel's spine. Flames erupted skyward. From the cockpit, infrared displays showed the ship's heat signature spiking, then fragmenting as the hull began breaking apart. Less than 4 minutes had passed since the order "cleared hot." 2 Iranian warships were now either sinking or catastrophically disabled. The remaining 3 vessels, 1 frigate and 2 corvettes, abandoned their blocking arc. Formation dissolved into chaos. 1 corvette accelerated directly away from the carrier group at flank speed, deploying chaff and smoke in a desperate attempt to obscure its profile. The other hesitated. That hesitation proved costly. Viper 2, weapons free. Another harpoon launch. This time, the missile approached low and fast, skimming just feet above the Gulf's surface. The corvette's close-in weapon system finally found a firing solution, but too late. The missile struck just forward of the bridge. The explosion was smaller than the destroyer's, but devastating for a ship of that size. Structural damage forced immediate abandonment of offensive posture. The vessel slowed sharply, trailing smoke. Inside the USS Gerald R. Ford, reports flowed in rapidly. 2 confirmed kills. 1 mission kill. Remaining contacts retreating. Captain Reeves studied the tactical map. He did not order pursuit. The rules of engagement were precise. Neutralize active threats. Do not escalate beyond necessity. The Iranian ships were now disengaging. Within 17 minutes of the first missile launch, the confrontation had effectively ended. No American vessels damaged. No American aircraft hit. 0 casualties. But the message had been delivered with unmistakable clarity. The sea space around the Ford was no longer contested. Above, the Super Hornets maintained orbit, while Growlers gradually reduced jamming output. Radar clarity returned across the region. What remained in the water were burning hulls and spreading oil slicks illuminated by the first hints of dawn. Back in Tehran, naval command centers struggled to piece together fragmented reports. Signals cut off mid-sentence. Damage assessments incomplete. Casualty numbers unknown. What had been intended as a show of resolve had become a devastating demonstration of technological and tactical disparity. And the strategic consequences were only beginning. Because the USS Abraham Lincoln was still inbound. Estimated arrival, 30 hours. 2 carrier strike groups operating together would represent an unprecedented concentration of American naval power in the Gulf. Iran's gamble to prevent that union had failed. But the deeper question now echoed across war rooms worldwide. Had this confrontation been spontaneous, or was something much larger unfolding? By the time the sun broke over the Persian Gulf, the tactical fight was over. The strategic consequences were just beginning. Aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford, Damage control reports confirmed what radar data had already shown. No hits, no injuries, no structural damage. The carrier strike group resumed formation, though at a heightened readiness posture. Aircraft remained airborne. Submarines in the area tightened their patrol boxes. Every sensor was alert, but attention was already shifting beyond the horizon. Within minutes of the engagement, secure communication lines between the carrier and the Pentagon were active. Raw combat telemetry, missile intercept data, and cockpit footage streamed in real time to analysts in Washington. There was no ambiguity. Iranian missiles had launched first. American forces had responded proportionally and decisively. Meanwhile, inside Iranian naval headquarters, confusion reigned. Initial reports from the damaged ships were fragmented. One destroyer unresponsive, one frigate likely sinking, two smaller vessels retreating with heavy damage. Communication interference during the engagement had left commanders with incomplete information. The intended blockade had lasted less than 20 minutes, and it had failed. The Supreme National Security Council convened an emergency session before sunrise. Senior commanders attempted to frame the confrontation as defensive action against foreign encroachment. But internal briefings painted a harsher reality. Their ships had been destroyed in international waters under overwhelming electronic warfare conditions. They had underestimated the speed of American response. They had overestimated their own survivability. At the United Nations, emergency consultations began before noon. Iranian representatives accused the United States of escalation. American diplomats countered with precise coordinates, radar tracks, and intercepted communications. Satellite imagery released publicly showed missile launch plumes originating from Iranian vessels well outside territorial limits. The narrative battle was short. Even states typically sympathetic to Tehran remained cautious. The data was difficult to dispute. Back at sea, the Ford's strike wing rotated aircraft back to deck. Damage assessment drones monitored the crippled vessels from distance, ensuring no renewed offensive movement. The Iranian ships that remained operational had retreated toward coastal waters, but they were no longer a blocking force. They were survivors. 30 hours later, the strategic picture changed dramatically. The USS Abraham Lincoln entered the operational theater. The site alone carried weight. 2 nuclear-powered supercarriers operating in coordinated proximity. Nearly 150 aircraft between them. Multiple cruisers and destroyers. Subsurface assets unacknowledged but present. It was the most concentrated American naval posture in the Gulf in decades. To regional observers, the message was unmistakable. Deterrence had shifted into dominance. Gulf states that had carefully balanced diplomatic channels between Washington and Tehran suddenly recalibrated. Defense consultations accelerated. Intelligence sharing increased. Air defense coordination expanded. Military planners across the region understood the implications. 2 carrier strike groups did not assemble in one confined maritime corridor by coincidence. It was a signal. But to whom? Iran, certainly. Yet the broader audience included other global powers monitoring American willingness to deploy overwhelming force quickly and without hesitation. Strategic analysts debated whether the twin carrier presence indicated preparation for larger operations. Was it a preemptive deterrent against nuclear advancement? A warning against proxy attacks? Or a broader demonstration of sea control capabilities? Official statements from Washington remained measured. Freedom of navigation, defensive posture, stability. Yet the physical reality spoke louder than press briefings. The combined strike groups represented hundreds of cruise missiles, layered air defense networks, advanced cyber capabilities, and strike aircraft capable of sustained operations. The margin for Iranian maneuver had narrowed dramatically. Inside Tehran, public messaging shifted toward resilience and restraint. The government avoided releasing full casualty numbers. State media focused instead on sovereignty narratives and calls for international mediation. Privately, however, the calculus had changed. A direct naval challenge had resulted in severe losses in under 20 minutes, and the Americans had not even committed their full arsenal. The psychological impact extended beyond material damage. Iranian naval doctrine emphasized asymmetric tactics, swarm boats, coastal missile batteries, layered harassment. But this confrontation had shown that conventional surface engagements against a prepared carrier strike group could end catastrophically. The waters of the Gulf remained tense. Oil markets reacted cautiously. Shipping companies reviewed risk assessments. Insurance premiums ticked upward. But there was no immediate follow-on strike, no bombardment of coastal facilities, no invasion. The carriers remained, visible, steady, unmistakable. Strategic ambiguity had been replaced by undeniable presence. And yet, one critical question lingered inside every military command center watching the region. Was this the conclusion of a single failed attempt? Or the opening chapter of something far larger? Because when two supercarriers operate together in contested waters, history suggests they are rarely there without purpose. And somewhere beyond radar range, decisions were being made that would determine whether the 17-minute clash was a warning shot or the first move in a much bigger game. The smoke from the crippled Iranian ships had barely cleared before military planners across the globe began dissecting what had just happened. 17 minutes. That was all it took. 17 minutes to dismantle a 5-ship blocking force. 17 minutes to redraw the naval balance inside one of the world's most sensitive waterways. But beyond the explosions and missile trails, something more important had been demonstrated. Speed. Not just speed of weapons, but speed of decision-making. From the moment Iranian fire control radar locked onto the USS Gerald R. Ford, the American response moved through layers: detection, verification, authorization, launch, intercept, counterstrike. Human oversight remained, but automation, training, and doctrine compressed the timeline. Iran had counted on hesitation. There was none. Inside the Pentagon, analysts replayed every second of the engagement. The Aegis intercept timing, Growler jamming bandwidth effectiveness, Harpoon impact sequencing, subsurface asset positioning, though never publicly acknowledged, was factored into the analysis. One conclusion stood out clearly. The engagement had not required escalation to achieve dominance. No cruise missiles fired from submarines, no long-range bombers deployed, no coastal strikes initiated. It had been a contained demonstration of layered naval superiority. That containment was deliberate. Washington understood that total destruction of all 5 Iranian vessels, pursuit into territorial waters, would have risked broader regional ignition. Instead, the response neutralized the immediate threat and stopped. Firm, measured, decisive. Meanwhile, Tehran faced a far more complicated internal problem. The operation to block the Ford had likely been approved at senior levels. It was too coordinated to be impulsive. The arc formation, the missile readiness posture, the synchronized maneuver, these were pre-planned. But the outcome had shattered assumptions. Iran's naval doctrine relies heavily on asymmetry: speedboats, coastal missile saturation, swarm tactics. Large surface combatants are symbols of prestige, but in open water engagements against advanced strike groups, they are vulnerable. The destruction of a destroyer and frigate in minutes exposed that vulnerability. Military leadership now faced difficult questions. Had they misjudged American restraint? Had they assumed the U.S. would hesitate to fire? Had internal political pressure pushed commanders toward a high-risk gamble? Externally, diplomatic channels went quiet, but not inactive. Back-channel communications intensified. European intermediaries reached out to both sides, urging de-escalation. Gulf states quietly conveyed concern over shipping lanes. Energy markets stabilized only after it became clear no follow-up strikes were imminent. But the presence of 2 American carriers remained, and that presence altered calculations far beyond Iran. China observed closely. Russia observed closely. Both nations track U.S. naval concentration patterns carefully. Deploying 2 supercarriers to the same confined maritime theater removes flexibility elsewhere. It signals priority, which meant the Gulf had moved up the American strategic ladder. Some analysts speculated the dual-carrier posture was not solely about Iran's navy. Perhaps it was about deterrence against broader regional disruption. Perhaps it was a warning regarding missile development timelines. Perhaps it was meant to demonstrate that even in an era of hypersonics and anti-access systems, carrier strike groups still command sea control when operating at full readiness. The optics mattered. 2 massive flight decks operating simultaneously, continuous launch cycles, air patrols overlapping, destroyers and cruisers forming layered shields. It was not just defense, it was dominance. Yet inside the Ford's Combat Information Center, the mood remained professional, almost clinical. There was no celebration. Combat had occurred. Lives had been lost on the other side. That reality carried weight, even amid operational success. Sailors rotated through heightened alert shifts. Intelligence updates streamed continuously. Satellite feeds monitored Iranian coastal missile batteries for unusual movement. Because the possibility of retaliation remained, Iran possessed shore-based anti-ship missiles, ballistic capabilities, fast attack craft. A surface engagement was only one dimension of its arsenal. The carrier's commanders understood that dominance does not eliminate risk, it reduces it. 36 hours after the initial clash, joint air patrols from both carriers conducted visible overflights along established maritime corridors. The message was unmistakable. The sea lanes would remain open. No additional Iranian surface ships attempted interference. The Gulf's shipping traffic resumed cautious normalcy. Insurance premiums adjusted downward slightly, but not fully. Strategic confidence takes longer to restore than it does to shatter. Back in Washington, the administration faced a balancing act. Publicly, officials emphasized restraint and defensive response. Privately, military planners assessed contingency options should Iran attempt escalation via proxies, cyber operations, regional militia strikes, or missile launches from coastal batteries. The confrontation had not ended the rivalry. It had clarified it. Iran had tested the line. The United States had responded immediately. The world had witnessed the result, but the deeper tension remained unresolved. Why had Iran chosen that moment to attempt a blockade? Was it purely about preventing the Ford and Lincoln from operating together? Or was it part of a broader pressure campaign tied to negotiations, sanctions, or regional leverage? Strategic behavior rarely occurs in isolation, and when two nuclear-powered supercarriers sit within coordinated range of a nation's coastline, every decision carries amplified consequences. One thing, however, was undeniable. The attempted blockade had failed. The Ford continued its patrol. The Lincoln joined it, and the maritime corridor remained open. Yet beneath the calm surface of the Gulf, new lines had been drawn, and everyone understood that crossing them again would not be a matter of minutes, but of something far larger. In the days that followed, the headlines focused on explosions, missile intercepts, and the speed of the American counterstrike. But beneath the surface, something more significant had occurred. A message had been delivered, without a formal declaration, without a speech, without a press conference heavy with rhetoric. It had been delivered in steel, fire, and restraint. The attempted blockade of the USS Gerald R. Ford was never just about 5 warships. It was about perception. Iran had sought to demonstrate resolve, to show that American naval presence near its coastline could be challenged, to suggest that even the world's most advanced aircraft carrier could be pressured into altering course. Instead, the opposite had unfolded. The carrier did not alter course. It did not retreat. It did not hesitate. The response had been fast, layered, and decisive, yet deliberately limited. And that limitation was the most powerful part. Military force had been applied with surgical precision. No coastal bombardment, no pursuit into territorial waters, no escalation into broader conflict, just neutralization of the threat. That restraint reshaped the narrative, because overwhelming power paired with discipline carries more strategic weight than destruction alone. Across defense ministries worldwide, analysts studied the engagement closely. They noted how quickly the American electronic warfare aircraft blinded Iranian sensors, how seamlessly the Aegis system intercepted incoming missiles, how strike aircraft coordinated multi-vector attacks within minutes of clearance. The engagement wasn't chaotic, it was structured, and that structure reflected decades of doctrine, training, and technological refinement. Iran's naval doctrine relies heavily on calculated risk, testing boundaries, probing reactions, applying pressure without crossing into outright war. But this time, the boundary had been crossed, and the response had been immediate. The internal impact inside Iran was difficult to measure publicly, but not invisible. State media emphasized sovereignty and resistance. Official statements framed the clash as defense against foreign provocation. Yet independent observers noticed subtle shifts. Naval exercises were temporarily scaled back. Surface patrol patterns changed. Communication discipline tightened. The failed blockade had exposed a vulnerability that could not be ignored. More importantly, it forced a reassessment of what escalation truly meant when facing a fully prepared carrier strike group. Meanwhile, aboard the Ford and Lincoln, life gradually returned to operational rhythm. Flight operations continued. Maintenance cycles resumed. Sailors rotated through watches, but readiness levels remained elevated. The commanders understood something critical. When a confrontation ends in 17 minutes, it doesn't erase tension, it compresses it. And compressed tension can resurface unexpectedly. Strategic planners in Washington now had leverage. 2 carriers in proximity represent more than aircraft and missiles. They represent sustained operational capability. Air dominance, sea control, cyber reach, intelligence fusion. It is not simply about firepower, it is about options. With 2 strike groups present, Washington possessed flexibility, ranging from visible deterrence to potential precision strikes, should circumstances demand. That flexibility itself served as deterrence. Regional partners took notice. Defense agreements were quietly revisited, joint exercises scheduled, intelligence channels reinforced. The Gulf's balance of power had tilted sharply and visibly. Yet the most intriguing aspect of the confrontation was what did not happen. No ballistic missile retaliation, no swarm attack from fast boats, no proxy escalation in the immediate aftermath. Iran paused, and pauses in geopolitics are rarely accidental. Some analysts suggested that Tehran recognized the asymmetry too clearly to risk further losses. Others argued that the attempted blockade was meant as a limited signal, one that backfired. But a deeper theory circulated quietly within strategic circles. Perhaps the true objective had not been to win a naval battle. Perhaps it had been to test response time, to measure electronic warfare capability, to assess intercept patterns, to gather intelligence from failure. If so, the cost had been severe. 2 major surface combatants destroyed or crippled. Hundreds of personnel lost or injured. International optics unfavorable. Intelligence gathering through sacrifice carries a high price. And the United States understood that possibility, which is why the carrier groups did not disperse immediately after the engagement. They stayed. Presence reinforces memory. The sight of 2 American supercarriers operating within coordinated air patrol cycles was not subtle. It was visible from satellite imagery. It was reported across global media. It was calculated in every regional war room. For Tehran, the message was layered. The United States would not be pushed off course. Missile launches would be met with intercept and counterstrike. Escalation would not be rewarded with hesitation. But equally important, measured response would remain measured, unless forced otherwise. That duality defined the moment. Strength without recklessness, force without frenzy. In strategic terms, that balance is rare. As weeks passed, the confrontation settled into history, but not obscurity. Military academies began drafting case studies. Analysts labeled it a modern demonstration of layered naval defense effectiveness. War colleges dissected the speed of escalation and de-escalation cycles. 17 minutes became more than a statistic. It became a benchmark. The waters of the Gulf eventually calmed. Oil slicks dissipated. Damaged hulls were salvaged or scuttled. Shipping lanes resumed full traffic. But beneath that calm surface, a new understanding persisted. The line had been tested, and it had held. Yet in geopolitics, stability is rarely permanent. Power shifts. Calculations evolve. Leadership changes. What remains constant is capability, and the willingness to use it when necessary. The attempted blockade of the USS Gerald R. Ford will likely be remembered not for its explosions, but for its clarity. A moment when pressure met preparedness, when challenge met response, when steel met steel, and only one side controlled the sea when the smoke cleared. And somewhere beyond the horizon, decision-makers continue to weigh the same question that shaped those 17 minutes. How far is too far? Because the next time that line is approached, the response may not stop at measured force. It may redefine the region entirely. In military history, there are battles that reshape borders. And then there are moments that reshape behavior. What unfolded in the Persian Gulf was not a prolonged war. It was not a campaign stretching months. It was a compressed confrontation, measured in minutes, but its impact extended far beyond those 17 violent moments. When Iran moved 5 warships into a blocking formation ahead of the USS Gerald forward, the objective was clear: assert control, demonstrate defiance, and force a strategic recalculation. Instead, the recalculation happened on the other side. The forward did not turn. The strike group did not scatter. The response did not stall. Layered defense engaged exactly as designed. Electronic warfare blinded targeting systems. Interceptors eliminated incoming missiles. Counterstrikes neutralized active threats. The sequence was not improvised. It was practiced. That precision mattered more than the destruction itself. Because in modern naval warfare, perception drives deterrence. For years, carrier strike groups have been described as vulnerable to saturation attacks, anti-ship missiles, and asymmetric tactics. Critics have questioned their survivability in confined waters like the Persian Gulf. This confrontation answered those doubts in real time. Not with theory, with execution. 2 missiles launched, 2 intercepted. Multiple hostile vessels engaged, threat neutralized, no American losses. And then, the response stopped. That final step defined the moment. Escalation is easy once weapons are in flight. Pursuit could have continued. Coastal facilities could have been targeted. Retaliation could have expanded. But it did not. Instead, the forward maintained course. The Lincoln joined it, and the most powerful naval formation in the region held position without further aggression. It was a demonstration of control, not just over the sea, but over escalation itself. For Tehran, the lesson was sobering. Surface warships, no matter how modernized, face immense risk when confronting a fully operational carrier strike group backed by electronic warfare, integrated radar systems, and coordinated air power. The attempted blockade had relied on the assumption that pressure would create hesitation. Instead, pressure triggered readiness. Regionally, the signal rippled outward. Allies recalculated their confidence. Adversaries recalculated their risk. Observers recalculated their analysis of American naval capability. 2 supercarriers operating together represent more than firepower. They represent sustained presence, continuous air patrol cycles, layered missile defense envelopes, command and control integration across air, surface, subsurface, cyber, and space domains. That integration, not any single missile strike, was the true story. 17 minutes exposed the gap between ambition and capability. But perhaps the most important question remains unanswered. Why did it happen at all? Was it a calculated gamble to prevent the Ford and Lincoln from operating jointly? Was it a domestic signal of strength? Was it a misjudgment born of overconfidence? Or was it something else entirely? A test of reaction time, doctrine, and resolve? In geopolitics, intent often hides behind action, and clarity sometimes comes only after consequences. For now, the Persian Gulf remains navigable. Shipping lanes are open. Naval patrols continue. The carriers eventually rotate, as they always do. But the memory remains. Military planners on both sides now operate with new data. Iran understands the speed and scale of response. The United States understands the threshold at which probing becomes engagement. The margin for miscalculation has narrowed. And that may be the most lasting outcome, because when lines are tested and hold firm, they become harder to cross again. Still, history reminds us that tension rarely disappears. It evolves. New technologies emerge. New leadership rises. New calculations are made. The Ford will not always be in those waters. The Lincoln will not always sail beside it. But the precedent set during those 17 minutes will endure. A clear sequence: lock radar, launch missiles, face intercept, receive counterstrike, lose the initiative. In modern naval warfare, speed is survival, preparation is dominance, and hesitation can be fatal. The attempted blockade did not spark a broader war. It did something subtler and perhaps more significant. It clarified the balance. When 5 warships tried to block one carrier, the result was not negotiation, not retreat, not prolonged standoff. It was decisive resolution. And in the quiet aftermath, beneath calm waters and steady flight operations, the message lingered more powerfully than any explosion. The sea is open. The line is drawn. Cross it again. And the next 17 minutes may look very different.